To move us on, I'm going to hand over to Jess, who's going to talk to us about where LCAT has come from before we then get into a walkthrough of the tool itself. Jess, over to you.
Great, thanks, Peter. Just double checking, can you hear me? I have had problems with my mic. I've gone through 3 already, so hopefully this one is working. Hi and welcome. My name is Jess Dickin, and I am a research fellow here at the European Centre for Environment and Human Health, which is part of University of Exeter. Joined here by colleagues as well from the university and also from our partner Cornwall Council. They're on the call too. And as you can see below, we are funded through a project called Blue Adapt. What I'm going to do is just talk to you a little bit about the background to the project, because I think that's really useful context. But before we start, I think what's probably quite important is to double check that everybody understands what adaptation is. So just briefly, in terms of what the Climate Change Committee refer to as adaptation, they're talking about adaptation is acting to reduce the damages and maximize the positive benefits that are available to us from climate change impacts. So in brief here, you'll see to the left-hand side, I've broken that down into largely it's understanding how climate change will impact on us now and in the future, and then making changes to the way we live, work, make and do things. And that includes making adjustments to our natural and built environment. And the overall aim, as is mentioned in that quote, is working to reduce the risks and maximise opportunities. There's multiple benefits to climate adaptation. So, for example, improving where we live and making it greener, healthier and safer, helping make our communities stronger so they can better cope with and recover from shocks, especially those who are most vulnerable. We can cut damage to our homes, workplaces and essential services like hospitals. We can save money in the long run by investing now. But additionally, we can protect people from health and well-being impacts like illness during heat waves and trauma from flooding. So there's lots of benefits to taking this action. And climate change is very much here now. So this is something we need to adapt to. I mean, largely in the UK, we're talking about seeing generally wetter and warmer winters and hotter, drier summers. And with that brings a number of hazards and impacts, some of which, as I said, we're already feeling, like heat waves, flooding and wildfire. With that introduction, hopefully that's just set the scene on the actual topic area we're going to be focusing on. In terms of the project itself, LCAT, so that's the Local Climate Adaptation Tool, we began this project back in 2020, and we began focusing on a scoping exercise with decision makers in Cornwall and trying to understand what they understood by adaptation, whether we could help as a university, particularly our centre with our focus on environment and health in that intersection, what health impacts they were concerned about, if anything, and what crucially were the key barriers to adaptation action. And the key insights they gave us were things like a lack of financial and time resources, which many of you have written into the Menti poll. This has not changed. A culture of short-term decision-making, a lack of knowledge, skills and confidence, a desire for cross-service and partnership working, but recognising that that siloed working that is usual in a lot of our organisations was causing a barrier. And some of their major concerns focused on worries around inequality and how a changing climate would impact on that and make it worse, mental health, especially in terms of health, and justice as well. They talked to us about there being no climate model that was readily available for local areas at that time, and that they really needed guidance and tools to support the work that they were going to do in this area and really wanted to do, but couldn't because of those multiple barriers. And what's not in here, and I think is still probably a major barrier, is the focus on mitigation over and above adaptation, where in fact best practice suggests we should do both hand in hand. So going back up to the top of my slide there, we began a co-design process with decision makers in Cornwall, and they came from various different sectors, largely local authorities, but also local NHS bodies, charities and business. And we got to a point of creating a prototype tool. After that, we started a co-design process with decision makers across the whole of the UK to be able to launch a UK-wide prototype. And then the final step was to launch the tool, which we did 3 weeks ago, and that's what we're going to show you in a minute. So the overall aim of the project was to co-design with local decision makers a digital tool that supports local decision makers in finding evidence-based adaptation solutions for the effects of climate change using health as a common language. So what we did in our co-design process, we developed specifications with stakeholders that would show us what kind of content, what kind of functionality they wanted and needed in this tool. And as I mentioned, we went through a couple of prototypes first. Key features were bearing in mind the barriers they experienced. So making sure it was a free, easy, online tool. So it didn't involve them needing funding or lots of capacity, that we would bring all the evidence into one place for them. So that saved them time and made it very easy to use. It was really important that we provided those adaptation solutions, because they were really asking us, what do we do about this problem once we understand that risk and impact? And crucially, because they were concerned about inequality and justice, that we provided some kind of information and data around those who are most vulnerable to climate change. The co-design has been with over 100 different professionals across the UK, working in local areas, as I mentioned, largely from local authorities, but also NHS bodies, charities and business. And that representation has included over 50 local authority areas. So we're really, really grateful to all of the stakeholders that have taken part, and in fact will continue to help us co-design into the future. We have also had contact and relationships with national policymakers, because it's really important that the design of the tool sits within the UK policy context in which climate change is being tackled. So in terms of what LCAT does, and Marissa will take you on a journey through it in a minute, is you would select your geographical area and view your local climate models. You'd then explore the routes to health impacts and who is most vulnerable, and then you'd be provided with a list that you can filter on the recommendations for action. So I'm going to come out and let Marissa share the tool.
Can we see that?
Yep.
Excellent. So as Jess mentioned, she kind of gave you a little bit of an overview of the tool, but I'm actually going to just walk us through it now. So this tool can do quite many things for you. We lay out just the outline of it at the top. You can see how local climates will change, what health and community impacts may occur as a result, who will be most vulnerable and why, and which adaptations to consider. LCAT is evidence-based and designed with and for local decision makers. Unfortunately, at this time, we do not have data for Northern Ireland in LCAT. We have identified a valid data set, and we are going to get that in there as soon as we can. So that will be one of our next updates. We do have access to a user guide. You can just click on that link there, and this takes you to our university website. And the user guide can be found over on that right-hand side at the bottom. So the first aspect of LCAT is that you select your area. You're going to select from this drop-down of geographic levels relevant to England, Scotland, and Wales. The map that you see here is interactive. It can be moved around and it can be zoomed in and out so that you can see your geographic level as you need it. For the demonstration, I am going to select the county of Norfolk. And we do provide all of our data within the tool. It is open access. So once you select your area, you're going to then be able to explore your local climate. We present 4 variables from the future climate data for 2070: rainfall, temperature, cloudiness, and windiness. As you can see here, there are 2 dropdowns that can be changed to produce different data outputs. The first dropdown addresses 2 future climate pathways, depending on the actions and policies taken in the near future. These future pathways are known as representative concentration pathways, or RCPs. LCAT shows data based on RCP 6, which is existing global policies. That's what's selected here. Or if you click the dropdown, you can look at worst case scenario, and that is going to be RCP 8.5. The second dropdown changes the data output between yearly, average, or winter and summer seasons. And if you would like to explore this data in further detail, you can just click this yellow button, Explore Climate Details, and that is going to provide these details in a bar graph form, and it lets you look at the decades between now and 2070. Again, you can change between these dropdowns to look at different scenarios, and the variables are right here to change between. So that is our climate data section. and you have the data source down below, we use the Chesscape data. The next section is called our climate hazard risk section. And this section provides information about climate hazards the UK will face in the future. We identified these hazards based on the United Nations General Assembly definition of what a hazard is. And that is a process, phenomenon, or human activity that may cause loss of life, injury, or other health impacts, property damage, social and economic disruption, or environmental degradation. Clicking on each of these icons provides a description of the hazard for the UK and the future trend. For instance, if I click on heat waves, I can see a description of heat waves within the UK, what the trend is going to be. And then at the bottom, we provide a link to a localized data set. I'm just going to click on this so you can see what it's going to take you out to. Not all of the links take you to the UK Climate Risk Indicator Explorer, but several of them do. It's a fantastic resource. And we also provide exactly what you would need to click on once you're within that resource. So for instance, here it says heat wave data is within the climate indicator category of temperature extremes. So I can come over here, find climate indicator category, change it to temperature extremes, and the Met Office heat wave data is the first one that shows up. So that is our hazard risk section. And while that section describes specific hazards and provides localized data sets for the risk of those hazards, this next section, which is the climate impact summary, is a more comprehensive view for the UK as a whole of indirect and direct impacts from a changing climate when those hazards interact with one another in a system. The impacts to human health and well-being from our changing climate are going to be complex. And we have created these pathways to help you visualize the relationships involved and see where multiple disciplines and sectors have a role to play. The climate impact pathways are separated into 6 climate topics. These can be viewed within this dropdown. For this example, I will stick to using extreme storms. After you select a pathway, you're going to see 2 sets of icon summaries. One is our health impact summary. You have a list of the common negative health impacts from each of these 6 climate topics. And then we have ones that are more specific to each of the topics as well. The next summary is going to be the community impact summary. This summary identifies the things that are going to happen directly to the community, such as damage and loss of possessions, or issues with people who require care to maintain well-being because of these impacts. We also allow for exploration of these climate impact pathways in further detail, and you can just click that yellow button there. The climate impact pathway below shows the direct and indirect impacts of climate hazards as understood through available evidence. These impacts, again, are specific to the UK rather than your selected area. You're able to see 2 views for each of these pathways. And this is going to be this drop down here that says summary or complete. The summary is going to be a condensed version of the pathway, and that's this lovely drawing here. And then if you wanted to see the complete, you just toggle to that one, and that is going to be the full pathway. For this example, I'm going to stick with the summary one as it's a bit more digestible to look at. The pathways here are very interactive. I'm going to refer to each of these as elements, and then the lines between them are connections. If you would like to see more about any of these elements, you can simply click on it, and it'll provide a description of what the element is, and then reference ID numbers. The reference ID numbers can then be found in our reference list, which I'll show in just a minute. If you want to understand the relationship between 2 elements, you can click on the line that connects them, and that is called the connection. And that is also going to provide references that justify why these 2 things are connected and how they interact. The connections can be direct or inverse, as the legend describes over here. A direct relationship means that both elements increase or decrease together. An inverse relationship means that when one element increases, the other one decreases, or vice versa. Clicking and holding an element activates what's called focus mode. So if I hover over it, you can see that it activates the focus, but it doesn't stay if I move away. So if I click and hold on cascading infrastructure, it keeps that activated focus and it lets you explore just the elements that are directly connected to that one. You can then either contract the focus, which brings it down just to the one element, or you can expand it further out and see how these pathways interact with one another. And then I just cleared the focus, and so it brings it back to the entire pathway. The pathways are also searchable. That's going to be this little search bar up in the corner. You can search based on one keyword, such as health, and it's going to show you any element that has health in the title, any element that is tagged as a health effect, or any element that has health within the description. You can also search by multiple words. So if I wanted to look at anywhere that said transport disruption, then that's going to be also available for you. And again, these pathways do represent just an initial scoping of the element of the evidence to consider climate change impacts within these interconnected systems. And because this evidence is always growing, we are looking to update these pathways regularly to make sure that they remain relevant. And as mentioned above, when you click on any of these and it provides a reference ID, you can see that reference list by clicking there. The reference ID is going to be in this far left column, and then it describes the reference type as well as the URL where you can access it. And our next section is going to be the personal and social vulnerability section. As mentioned here, everyone will be exposed to the impacts of climate change and extreme weather, but not everyone is affected equally. Below, we have provided icons that are interactive, similar to the hazard section. If you click on each of them, it provides you information about that specific group of people. It provides who they are, why are they vulnerable, where can you find more information, and how can you find local data about that group of people. And we do signpost out to Climate Just, and they are continually updating their data as well. And the last section is our adaptation section. And this is based on the expected climate change and resulting impacts in the UK. The following adaptations should be considered, but we do not prioritize them at this time. These adaptations were identified to reduce risk to humans and the environment while providing co-benefits where possible. So for each of these, we have categorized them by those 6 climate impact pathways. Again, we're just going to look at extreme storms for this example. And the adaptation list can be filtered by 2 different categories. We use the Climate Change Committee adaptation themes, and these are seen here. And we also use the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change Adaptation Activity Types, and these can be seen here. The Climate Change Committee themes describe thematic areas for adaptation action, like nature, transport, or health, while the IPCC adaptation activity types describe the type of adaptation it is, like ecosystem-based, economic, or government policy. And these allow you to create more of a short list based on what your interest is or what your area of expertise is, or what you have the capacity to bring to the rest of your colleagues. And each adaptation listed has a description as well as supporting references. And some of them do have case studies listed within the references, and in the future, we're hoping to highlight those case studies more. So we have our list of adaptations. And then at the very bottom, we do have a link to our evaluation that we're running. And we would appreciate your feedback, positive or negative, on the tool. And this can be accessed by clicking on this link right here. And that takes you to our evaluation. And that is our tool. We have down here the contact if you have any questions. And again, a link to that user guide in case you have any questions that are answered there.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Marissa. That was a wonderful walkthrough. And thanks, Jess, for the background context as well. A lot to take in. a lot of information there, and obviously you'll have plenty of opportunity after this session to have a play yourself and look through. But we have got time now to respond to any questions that are coming up. Anything that you feel that'd be really useful to understand before you go away and have a play with it. Please do put your questions in the chat. Some of them, just in the interest of time, I'll just read out directly. If there are some that are a little bit more nuanced, I might invite you to unmute and speak to your question in a little bit more detail. But we've got a first question from Sarah, which hopefully is a relatively simple one to answer, which I'll put to Jess, Marissa, and any other of the team who want to jump in. The first question is, how will the references be reviewed and updated over time?
Sure. You want me to take that one, Marissa, or will you do it?
I don't mind. I can comment on it if you want. So essentially, I worked on most of the content for a lot of the tool, and that was done using a targeted literature review. And so I will be incrementally doing that for each of those 6 climate impact pathways on different kind of time scales. We're hoping to maybe do it once every year or so, but again, LCAT has a certain kind of lifespan, so we're going to base it off of that. But essentially, I will just be repeating that literature review, but for any new evidence. So the evidence that is in there now, we feel secure keeping that in there. We have archived links in case anything changes. So that should be confident in there. And then any new published research, because as we said, the kind of area is always growing in evidence. Those will be researched again and put back in when we're able to.
Yeah, I think in an ideal world, what we'd aim to do is to review the literature once every 6 months or so that we can capture any significant additional reports, or if there has been a significant change in thinking. But by and large, the literature that's been included, has a lifespan that's well beyond the length of LCAT anyway, so there shouldn't be a need to remove materials.
Thank you both. Belinda's asked a question around how this tool can be used and shared from the perspective of, in this example, carbon literacy facilitation with parish councils and community groups. I mean, I can say a bit about it's been designed, as Jess talked about, for local decision makers, but Emma, Marissa, Jess, would I be right in saying that anyone can use this with what it is and as it is? If it's going to be useful, then use it. It's been designed for a specific purpose, but much of the content, as has been said, is open source and is, if it can be useful in a particular way, then please do use it. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, that's fair to say. And just to reiterate that it's being co-designed with professionals for professionals, but that absolutely doesn't stop anybody using it. It's completely open online for people to use it for free. So yeah, you've got that completely right. I think there was another question that sort of relates a little bit about whether anyone's actually used it and whether we have examples. I mean, that's largely what the evaluation is now set up to do, because we only launched this version 3 weeks ago. It could be quite possible that someone's used it already, but we're keen to not only understand how people are using it and whether the functionality and content are meeting people's needs, but more importantly, what impact is it having? So that evaluation is meant to run over 18 months. So in terms of providing you with the results of the evaluation, we're talking next year. But that doesn't mean to say that, if we're approached by organisations who say they're happy to share their learnings, that we could do that. Right at the end, we're going to ask about whether you'd like future webinars, and maybe that might be one that we could refer to. And actually, Reese, who's our partner in this from Cornwall Council, has got his hand up. So maybe you're about to tell me that you've got a good example.
Yeah, I was going to just say that there's a couple of examples, and I've just looked at a couple of the questions around adaptation plans as well. So we're taking what's been developed through LCAT in relation to kind of a lot of the basis for developing the Cornwall adaptation strategy, and then the individual community adaptation plans that would fall out of that adaptation strategy for the different areas around Cornwall. So there's very much the opportunity to embed it into those. In terms of a specific example, I can tell you one where it's already been used in terms of some of our adult social care teams that we were working with over the last couple of weeks with some adaptation workshops to kind of build up to the strategy. Very much them using the tool to look at what the potential different implications for their service area that they deliver is, in terms of either people that they're responsible for or that they're commissioning services to support, in terms of what the health implications for those climate impacts might be. And some of that is now directly feeding back into their business continuity plans. So there's quite a closed loop there in terms of how it's taken from using the tool all the way through into identifying what the impacts and the adaptation actions might be, and then what they might be able to do as part of the business continuity to make them more resilient. And in the initial instance of those, obviously some of the actions are more long-term planning, but that's just one example I can think of already that's kind of been used in the last couple of weeks. But yeah.
Thank you, Reece. There's lots of questions coming in, so we'll get through as many as we can, but any questions that aren't answered today, we'll come back on in the follow-up email. So there's Sarah's question about plans or goals in the future. Jess will be saying a little bit more about next steps in a bit.
Yep.
Alex has asked around, can this information be copy and pasted into, for example, an adaptation plan for a hospital trust, or are there copyright implications? I think we've addressed this with the open source comment, but again, an opportunity just to reassure how this can be used. Jess, if you want to.
Yeah, absolutely. You can use it for whatever need you have. I was going to mention it in a minute when I talk about next steps for the tool, but one of our big aims is to provide you with the opportunity to download either the data or a summary. So that's very much top of our to-do list for the next iteration, because we've been asked for that by many stakeholders. So we're very aware that people want that. Emma, did you have something to add to that?
To say that if you are using the tool, it'd be really helpful if you could reference LCAT, just to sort of, so that it would help us to track how it's being used if we're, kind of if we see cited documents or whatever, but just to give us sort of an acknowledgement of where you've sourced data from.
Thanks both. Rebecca from Bug Life, do you want to just talk to your question about environmental degradation? If you're able to come off mute.
Hi there, sorry. Yeah, apologies, I was a little bit late to the presentation, but I'm really interested as also chair of our climate emergency group on our council, and of course we're bringing together the nature crisis with the climate crisis, and with my area of work with an ecologist, we're working with communities across Scotland, training them how to monitor the health of the river. So I guess from my side, I'm interested in how these tools can bring both questions together. And obviously bringing people in the community together as a result of this, but I wasn't sure. Obviously it's a huge question and massive to add on, but I was just interested to see what your thoughts were on that.
Thanks, Rebecca. Anyone need to respond to that?
I think at the moment it's probably an area that needs further work, Rebecca. I mean, kind of recognizing that we would love to have that the biodiversity element included in them. We do have some nature-based solutions included, but I think that's one space that it would be good to expand on. And that's, I'm sure Jess will be talking about this in areas of development that we have in mind. The tool that we've launched is a starting point, and we're really kind of hoping that as part of the evaluation and feedback from sessions like this, we'll develop further thoughts on where to expand the tool and how we can make it more relevant and more useful. So it's really helpful to have those thoughts, and we may well come back to you, Rebecca, and have a chat, if that's okay, about what you would need for it to be, more relevant and more useful for you.
Thank you very much indeed. Yes, no problem at all.
Thanks, Rebecca. So we'll run one more Menti question at the end, which will touch on a point that's come up in the chat and in that question as well around what else would be useful. So do please keep those thoughts in mind. Interesting question from Sam. This touches, Marissa, on what you were talking us through about the different levels of scale that you can look at. Are there notable differences when you look at small scale areas? For example, LSOAs, do the yearly changes or hazards differ?
Yes, so in LCAT, for our climate data that we provide, that's at 1 kilometer of resolution. Now, I can't say for certain if there is a noticeable change between those areas, but you are able to look at the data between that kind of small scale change. And then for the other climate risk indicator website, that one is at 12 kilometers of resolution. So we're not able to kind of say there is a noticeable difference or not between that scale of resolution, but we do provide the data.
I think one thing that you will become different is when we start to make the localized vulnerabilities data available. That's probably where you'll see more of that localization as opposed to climate. I mean, there are some places where you might get quite significant climate differences if you're up a mountain or on a south-facing slope or somewhere like that. But it's the other elements of LCAT that may well, provide a different local perspective rather more than potentially the climate as a whole.
Thanks, Faith. Charles has asked about including the Isle of Man. She talked about Northern Ireland, but are there plans to include the Isle of Man, given the UKCP 18 data and climate risk indicators both covering that region?
Really good question. I wasn't aware we'd missed it off, so we clearly need to add that in when we put Northern Ireland in. Thank you for flagging it.
Thanks, Charles. Highlights the importance of things like this. Absolutely. Great. So lots of really great comments in the chat. Thank you. Mark has asked a very good question that relates to the Mentimeter poll at the beginning, but how does this address funding? Obviously, there's not necessarily a direct link, but if anybody wants to talk to thoughts around that or ways it might support the advancement of funding for the adaptation sector as a whole.
Yeah, sure. I mean, from my point of view, in terms of what the tool provides you with, because it's free and because I guess we've put in the time to bring together hours of literature reviews and mining the data, we've saved decision makers locally that time, and we know a major barrier is knowledge, skills and confidence, so that also. So on a small scale it's affected funding, but I realise you're probably referring to the looming issue of funding more generally really lacking around climate change adaptation. At the moment we don't signpost to pots of funding or availability of different funding sources, and it's not currently in our remit. But what I would say is, by being able to go through the process of using the tool and creating a profile for your local area as to what their future climate will be and likely risks and impacts, that in and of itself provides really strong evidence for you to then go ahead and try and achieve funding, whether that be internally to your organisation or externally.
Yes.
I think we could also add that we are using the feedback we get from this, and the fact that funding is the one thing that comes out every time we ask that question. When we're talking to policymakers, we are sharing that perspective. I mean, I think we all know that funding is a key constraint, and there's a limit to what a tool like LCAT can actually do. But we do, fly the flag and bang the drum whenever we get the opportunity.
Thank you. And Emma Dixon put a helpful reply to that comment in the chat as well. It provides evidence needed for bids or taking to cabinet. Yeah. So as a tool in that way. Rhys, did you want to come in on that one as well?
Yeah, just a second, or to reinforce that, I think from our sort of council's perspective, one of the ways that we are looking at evidencing that is the implications for the council and kind of Cornwall's residents as a whole in relation to the impacts of those hazards, risks, what they're costing at the moment, and then LCAT obviously producing what the adaptations to those are. So very much kind of developing a cost benefit analysis to show that if we try and plan for them better now and become more adaptive, that it will reduce the impacts in the long run. So I can already see, although it hasn't come out in relation to direct decisions, it's already feeding into the narrative and what we're taking to members in relation to those points around if we invest funds in this now and the adaptation that could come as a result of them, that it will be, will make us more sustainable or kind of reduce the impacts in the long run. Really.
Great, thank you, Rhys. We're at 1:45 now, so there's a couple more questions, but I'm going to hand back over to Jess to talk to us a little bit about next steps, and then we'll have a little bit of time after that for any follow-up questions as well. If you've had questions in the chat already that haven't been addressed, those will be in a follow-up, so rest assured nothing will be lost. But Jess, over to you.
Yeah, that's great. Let me just get my slides back up again. All right, so that's where we got to. So in terms of next steps, we've sort of touched on a few of them already, but the key one really is how important this evaluation is going to be to us now, because since launch, we just want to see what's working well and not, and then, as I mentioned, the impact it's having. So there's a number of ways you could do that. So Marissa showed you the link within the tool, but you can come to us direct, and our contact details will be at the end and shared after. And essentially, it's an opportunity to do a questionnaire whenever it is useful to you. And then there'll be a follow-up questionnaire in 6 to 8 months to see whether there's been any change. We're very keen on positive and negative feedback. And there'll be another slide in a minute with a bit more information. The other thing to note is that we've referred a couple of times to one of the key barriers being a lack of knowledge and skills. And while the tool goes some way to support people to overcome that barrier, a while ago we realised there might be a need for an additional resource that would sit alongside the tool. And so we've been really excited to work with Oxfordshire County Council, who've kindly co-funded a standalone resource that will be on the same website Marissa mentioned earlier, our project website. And that is going to be an introduction to local climate adaptation. You can see a snapshot there of the front page. What that's going to do is provide a bit of information about what adaptation is, a bit like what I did at the start, why it's important, and the likely climate change we will see in the UK and the impacts and risks. And then probably most useful will be the part which talks through what best practice looks like. So, for example, we've alluded to one already around how you consider mitigation alongside adaptation, because of course it shouldn't stand alone. There's elements in there around the importance of embedding health throughout the decision-making process, embedding climate justice throughout the decision-making process. So that's all in there. And then it talks a bit more around how to understand vulnerability in the context of climate change. So in relation to hazards and exposure. So we're hoping to launch that towards the end of April, all being well. And if people are happy, we can share that with you because we have your emails from the sign up. And we'll be doing a bit of PR around that. So that's quite exciting and will really, really complement this tool. The co-design process for the tool will continue. This isn't the final version. So we've always worked in an organic way, and that's in part because of that co-design process. And we will continue to do that. There'll be other iterations of the tool over the coming year and a half. And part of that work will include things like including the Northern Ireland data that's currently missing, exploring the feasibility of downloadable data sets, downloadable summaries, looking at whether we can bring more data into the tool rather than signpost you out, and whether that's feasible in terms of all those different geographies that we currently utilise. It will be about enhancing the case study offer within the tool. That's something that's often asked for by stakeholders. So you will find hyperlinks within the adaptation section to multiple case studies, but we'd like to enhance that, make it easier to read, make it easier to find. And so that's something we'll work on too. So there's a number of things already in train. There is an opportunity as well for you to join our co-design process. You don't have to have been part of that since the beginning. So again, our email at the end, LCAT@extra.ac.uk, is the one you contact us on, and you're really, really welcome to be part of that co-design process. We tend to only meet 2 or 3 times a year, always online, and usually only for an hour and a half. And we ask stakeholders how else we could support them rather than just the co-design process. And they asked us a while ago to make sure that we have keynote speakers at each of those, so that there's a point of interest talked about as well as the co-design workshop. So for example, we've had speakers from the Met Office and local partnerships recently, as well as actual case studies, like we had Lancaster come and talk about their work to update their local plan around adaptation. So yeah, there's lots of interesting content as well as that co-design. Just going back to the evaluation then, so we'll circulate this after, but yeah, we're interested in how your experience has been and then what impact it's having. I've mentioned questionnaires, and there'll also be an opportunity for those who are willing to do interviews at follow-up as well. Those will all be scheduled at a convenient time for you, and you can obviously opt out at any time. There's no pressure to take part, and your responses will be anonymised. You can also forward this detail on to any colleagues who are using the tool. So it might be colleagues in external organisations who are using it for that whole area approach, or it could be colleagues internal to your organisation. The point with LCAT is it's meant to be usable by anyone across the hierarchies within which we work, so from officer through to senior decision maker, and it should be useful for all sectors. So we're keen to get a good spread in the evaluation. So there's the email address again. So there's the hyperlink to the tool. I can see a couple of people have shared it in the chat during this session as well. Our email address there for the project team, and our project page is currently sat on the European Centre for Environment and Human Health's website. And that's where you'll also access additional tools and resources like the one I said is coming at the end of April. So thank you very much. We're going to finally hand back over to Peter. If I just stop sharing.
Jess, great, thank you for that. We've got a few minutes left. I want to finish before the hour so that we're not rushing. So before we just look at any final questions, I'm aware there's already quite a few in the chat that have come through in the last 5 minutes, and we'll try and respond to as many of those afterwards as possible. I'm going to go back to that final Mentimeter question that I mentioned. So I've just reshared the link there in the chat, and I'm going to share my screen again. And so this last question, which some of you have already alluded to, were if we were to put on future webinars, or possibly not even webinars, workshops, something a bit more interactive, for example, what is it that you think would be useful? So again, this is all anonymous. We're not holding anyone to anything. If you've got suggestions, they're very, very welcome. And we'll collate these and have a look through. So already immediately case studies coming up as a really clear trend and theme, which is really useful to see how it's been used, practical uses, outcomes, example scenarios. So this is great, and this won't be your only opportunities to make suggestions around this, but it's really helpful to see what is coming through immediately, just your first reactions to the tool and what would help you use it more effectively. So yes, thank you very much for this. I'll leave it up for a few more seconds. And if you can't get onto the Mentimeter for any reason, do feel free to put your comments in the chat there as well. We'll collate all of these answers later on. But case studies, practical applications really coming out. Estimated costs for adaptation, so also some really practical ideas that maybe not around webinars but around things that can be built into the tool. And again, the evaluation process that Jess mentioned is a really useful place to add thoughts like that as well. And nice, the unobvious ways to use it, yeah, that's a really nice example. So great, thank you very much. That's incredibly useful. I'm going to stop sharing there, but I'll leave the question running. So feel free to keep adding to it if you want, and we'll come back to and save all of those later on. So we've got a couple of minutes left. There are a few comments in the chat that have been a little bit lost in discussion, which is great, and I will save all of that. So maybe if you've got a fresh question, please do put it in the chat now. Or a question you've previously asked that hasn't been answered and I've missed that, feel free to repost it. We've maybe got a chance for a couple more if there's anything else that feels really useful and important to know now before you go away and have a play with the tool in your own time. But as has already been said, this won't be the last opportunity to feed in and to get responses as well. So just wait to see if there are any final questions coming in. A lot of really positive comments, which is really great to see, and a real testament to the amazing team that have been working on this for such a long time in such a collaborative and generous way. And oh yeah, already people expressing interest in being part of what happens from here. So I don't see any further questions other than ones that have already been posed, which we will come back to once I can sift through the chat with a bit more time. So I'll maybe finish this up there. Thank you everybody for coming along. Thank you to Jess and Marissa for guiding us through so clearly and expertly. Thank you to Emma and Reese for adding your perspectives as well. And thanks to everyone for coming, for all of your questions and your enthusiasm for this amazing resource. We'll send follow-up email with another link to the tool with the slides and with responses to some of the questions that haven't been answered. And as it's been said, it's an ongoing process, so really would welcome ongoing engagement, use of the tool, and please share it with others who you think might be able to make the most of the work that's been done. So thanks for joining, and we will be in touch.
Thanks very much, everyone.